My gosh, it looks like we're having a big party here tonight, but I know you're all here to learn. You know, Chancellor Perlman always appreciates what I have to say about the university, and Chancellor, when I look at this crowd, I think it looks like we're ready for a tailgate for a football game, and you know, that's important for our state. So first of all, I want to welcome all of you to Nebraska, and in particular, those of you who are part of the Big Ten. We really appreciate the fact that this year you've agreed to let Nebraska win the Big Ten championship. Thank you very much in advance for that. Chancellor, I don't understand how come everybody's not applauding that one, but anyway, we are excited to have you here in Nebraska. Rural America and these issues are important to our country and to the future of America. And I want to share a few thoughts with you tonight, if I could, both as governor of Nebraska, and this year I'm currently serving as chair of the National Governors Association. And as governor of Nebraska, what I would share with you a little bit what Ronnie said. From my perspective, the two most important issues for our state, and I suspect for most states, are education and jobs. And you're going to hear me talk a little bit about that. But from my perspective as governor, I've worked very hard with our citizens, the University of Nebraska, and our other partners to develop a bold and strategic vision to make Nebraska a great place to create jobs and grow a business, a great place to obtain an education for students of all ages, and a great place to raise a family. And then I look at it this year from my perspective as chair of the National Governors Association. And when you're chair, you have the opportunity to develop an initiative that has somewhat of a national focus. And my initiative has been growing state economies, because the number one issue in America is job creation. You know, if you don't have a job, it's pretty hard to take care of your family. I've hosted 4 economic development summits all across America, Hartford, Connecticut, Nashville, Tennessee, Seattle, Washington, and about a month ago here in Omaha, Nebraska. We are working hard to provide governors and state policymakers with better options to assess the economic environment in their state and create strategies designed to foster economic growth in both the urban and rural parts of our state. A major emphasis has been on understanding how a small business becomes a fast-growing firm and what policies support that transformation. High-growth businesses, as I expect most of you know, are one of the driving forces of the modern global economy. They are a primary source of job creation, prosperity, and economic competitiveness. And I would make the argument today, because of technology, you can be located anywhere in America, from the smallest community to the largest community, and get that job done. As governors, we want to help the private sector grow and create new job opportunities for our citizens. Small businesses are the economic engine of our state and America. They're key to America's growth. Now, it's not that we don't need large businesses, and we appreciate all of that, but at the end of the day, it's about small businesses and entrepreneurs who are going to create the high-growth businesses that are really going to drive this economy here in Nebraska, in the Great Plains, and all across America. Firms in their first year of existence, we have found, add an average of 3 million new jobs. Survivors of those startups usually create more net new jobs than all other small startups combined. And then the key is, once you've started on a successful track, the challenge is how to stay ahead, how to go from good to great, and do it again and again and again by introducing spin-offs and entering new markets. Firms that remain entrepreneurial, and we hear this all the time, but it's really true, firms that remain entrepreneurial are the ones that continue to innovate and launch new products. I'm sure you're going to hear a lot in this conference about innovation. It is critical. It's important to our future growth. Successful businesses depend on innovative ideas, access to early stage financing, management capacity, strong networks, and the right set of social and economic conditions. Now, in any given environment, in any given state, some of those factors are going to be present, others won't. And our key challenge is, if you're going to promote entrepreneurial activity, you need to identify your strengths and your weaknesses, and how are you going to continue to move forward? How are we particularly going to play off our strengths? And to do that, you need the help of the private sector. And we need to make sure that we continue to talk to our business partners to make sure we understand what our assets are relative to innovation. We need to determine the best policy strategies that are going to move our states forward, and particularly the rural parts of our state. And then it still comes down to education and training the next generation of business owners and leaders. And that's where all of you can come into play. You can have a tremendous impact on our ability in America to grow by providing that education, providing that training. And let me just try to share with you a little bit of what we've done in Nebraska. We're proud of our success, and as good as we've done, we know we have to do even better in the future. But again, I go back to those two issues, education and jobs. We want to make sure that every young person in Nebraska gets the very best education we can provide them. And I want to be clear, and I know I'm speaking to an audience who understands this. A high school education is no longer sufficient. You need at least a two-year associate's degree, or preferably a four-year degree from a college or a university, if you're going to be able to successfully compete in the future. And then the other half of that equation I talk a lot about is we want to make sure we're creating high-skill, high-paying careers right here in Nebraska. And I suspect most every state, your leaders would tell you, after you've provided that great education, you'd prefer to keep them in your home state, growing that business right there in Nebraska or wherever your home state may be from. And I would just share with you, there are a number of factors that come into play. You know, there's no one silver bullet, but I will say I believe it takes a laser-like focus on these two issues, and that's what I've tried to do for the 7.5 years I've been governor. For example, we totally modernized our economic incentive programs. They hadn't been modernized since the 1980s. It's called the Nebraska Advantage. And I'm proud of the fact that site selection consultants all over America now describe our economic incentives as one of the best in the country. And in fact, recently the Tax Foundation of America, based on location and a number of other things, said the best place to start a new business is right here in Nebraska. Secondly, taxes do matter, and we passed the largest tax relief package in the history of the state, and we know every day we're competing against every state represented here. We've lowered taxes on small businesses. We balanced the state budget by controlling our spending, not by raising taxes, but I want to emphasize we have made major investments in education and jobs. I try to remember every day when we make these decisions about our budget, I ask myself two questions. Is it going to educate more young people? And is it going to create more jobs in our state? And if it doesn't fall in one of those top two priorities, then I think seriously about, is that where we should be investing our money? And we've got to make tough decisions every day like most of you. For example, I'm proud of the fact that a little over a year and a half ago, in a very difficult economic environment, we invested $25 million in the new University of Nebraska here at Lincoln Innovation Campus and the future of our state. And that was a tough decision to make, but it was the right decision to make, because in difficult times, it's maybe even more important to make those kind of decisions. We also passed what we described the Talent and Innovation Initiative, and I just want to share one thing with you in that regard. A new Nebraska internship program. I believe we're the only state in the country right now doing it the way we're doing it, but basically what we've done to challenge every business in this state, and particularly I would argue for rural Nebraska, for every dollar a business will create a new internship in their community, we'll match it dollar for dollar. And so if you want to demonstrate and prove to young kids that there are jobs in rural Nebraska and rural America, get them back out there in an internship program. And we've had phenomenal success in the first year of this program. We're a top 10 business-friendly state by almost every measurement, and one we're very proud of. We have the second lowest unemployment rate in America at 4%. That's a remarkable achievement, and I attribute it to all of our partners, the business community, the education community, the state legislature, all of us who are working together to achieve that goal. Now, one that I think is particularly important for a conference like this, Bloomberg Business Week identified Arlington, Nebraska, a community of 1,500 people, as the second best place in America to raise kids because it's a Midwestern farming community with top-notch schools. Think about what they're saying. Take Arlington out of it for a moment, even Nebraska. What they're talking about is rural America. And what do we have to offer in rural America that's unique and important to citizens all across this country? Small towns, safe communities, good jobs, great schools, affordable homes, and an unmatched quality of life. That's what it's all about, and you can't put a dollar value on that. You know, I kid all the time, but I know it's true because I grew up in rural Nebraska. When you're growing up in a small town all across America, if you do something wrong during the day, before you get home at night, your parents are already going to know about it. Now, I knew I was going to be governor, and I never did a single thing wrong when I was growing up. I just want you to know that. Now, my mom would probably tell you something different. But think about that quality and what you have to market in the rural parts of the United States of America. Now, the final point I want to leave with you, which I think is very important too, is leadership. You have to have leadership. Chancellor Perlman and I were talking before I got ready to give my speech. We know the communities in Nebraska that have great leaders, and they're going to move their community, no matter how small, forward. Every once in a while, I've said this, you know, every once in a while I have someone in Nebraska come up to me and say, I want it to be like the 1950s. And I tell them, you must want Nebraska to die. We can't go back to the 1950s. We got to move forward in the 21st century with all the smart technology that we have. But there's no better place to live, to work, and to raise a family than in rural America. In our case, rural Nebraska. And we have to make sure that we're promoting that. And that takes leadership. And that's what all of you in this room can provide. That's our challenge. I believe we can get it done. And every once in a while someone says, well, yeah, but you know, you can't grow rural Nebraska. Well, let me just share one statistic with you to wrap this up. In 2 of the last 3 years, the population growth in our state, in Nebraska, 38th most populous state in America, has exceeded the national average. And we've exceeded the national average because we put these policies in place. And now all of a sudden young people want to stay here because they've got great opportunities. They always knew this was a great place to live. We have more middle-class families moving back to Nebraska because of what we now have to offer in terms of job creation, education, and all the other things that are important. So I believe it can be done. And my goal is over the next decade, every year, I want to make sure our population growth exceeds the national average. And if you do that, think about where your state is headed. So you can make a difference. And I'm extremely delighted that you're here in our state. We turned out the best weather we could for you. That's no doubt thanks to the University of Nebraska and all our other partners. But again, rural America is a special place. It's a very special place. And we just need to go out and market it every single day. And I think that's one of the most important jobs we can do. Put all those ingredients together and go out and convince every American, if you want to have the best quality of life, you want to have the best job, you want to have the best opportunities for the education of your children, go to rural Nebraska and go to rural America. Have a great conference. Thank you.
Can you hear me okay? Okay. Well, let's once again thank Governor Heineman for those words of encouragement. My job in the next 10 minutes is to frame the next couple of days for you and to try to give you some perspective on why we've asked you to be here, what we hope to accomplish with you being here with us, and to get a little bit of the vision set for our discussions, particularly tomorrow, and then as we go into some focused conversations on Thursday morning. I want you to think back, if you will, to 150 years ago, and many of you in the room are going to know what's magic about that 150. We're in the 150th anniversary of the Morrill Act, of the Homestead Act, of the forming of the Transcontinental Railroad, of the forming of the U.S. Department of Agriculture. 1862, as we often talk about it, was a momentous year in our history because of all of those things. And if you think about, take Nebraska as an example, the way that that set of events that President Lincoln and our federal system put into place at that time, the way that unfolded, the way that it shaped the landscape of the Great Plains region in particular, it's been pretty phenomenal. The land grant system has had huge impact on productivity in agriculture, but at the same time, the land grant system has also been successful in increasing productivity of agriculture. The technologies that we have produced, the things that we've been able to put into place, have had the other consequence of where we need fewer people engaged day to day in production agriculture. You know the conundrum. You understand that issue that we have to deal with. So as we look at the way that developed, and as we look at, take Nebraska as the living laboratory here, you'll hear me use that term several times the next couple of days. If we use that as a living laboratory to understand the way that happened, the way towns were settled, the distribution of those towns, the distribution of those towns on and off the railroad system as we know it. We all kind of can see that. All you got to do is look at a map of this state and see the way that it developed over those periods of time. Then put over top of that the technology developments that I just mentioned. So as we went through the 1940s, and we went through the 1950s, the 1960s, the 1970s, the last couple of decades to get us to where we are today, it's no secret to all of us that even in Nebraska, we have seen that as a demographic shift in people, in population, in the way that people are distributed across the landscape, right? Would you all agree with me on that? So we have 93 counties in this state. Only 9 of those 93 counties have increased in population in the last 4 decades. The other majority of the counties in the state have seen gradual declines in population because of that conundrum, if you will, that we've been dealing with. So if you go back to 1862 and the late 1800s, the early 1900s, agriculture meant rural. And if you read the foreword in the booklet that you received when you registered, you'll see a little bit of discussion about that. Agriculture meant rural. Now fast forward to 2012. We still think in a way of agriculture defining rural, but I would wager to you that rural is not all agriculture in the future. We've probably reached a point in time where that isn't the norm as we think about the next number of generations ahead. It has to be much more diverse than that. So it's not just the economy of producing, it's a natural resource economy and it's a knowledge economy that we have to innovate across, as you heard the governor say here in a few minutes ago. So as we've thought about that, and we thought about this living laboratory that we live in Nebraska and the greater region that we're a part of, we've questioned ourselves about whether it's time in the next era of the land-grant university. We're proud to be a land-grant university at the University of Nebraska. We've questioned ourselves to say, should we amp up our efforts? Should we think about, in a different way, in a different model, how we address the long-term rural sustainability of rural regions generally, and perhaps in this case in the Great Plains of North America, where we have similar problems as you go from the Texas High Plains all the way up into Canada through this region of North America. So we started talking about that a little over a year ago, and many of you in the room that represent our campuses of the university system, whether that's at Kearney or whether that's in Omaha, at the Med Center or at the University of Nebraska Omaha, or at our technical ag program at Curtis or here at UNL, have heard us talk about the idea of forming a new institute across the university system that leverages all of the resources that we have to focus on this long-term rural future that we think we can envision and begin to see how that might play out now in decades ahead to grow the state, to grow the region, as Governor Heineman talked about a few minutes ago. And you see the putative mission statement that was shared with you before the conference, and we received feedback from a lot of you about it, that we've developed over this past year for this idea of a new institute across the system. And with help from a number of people that we've listened to, whether that be in the legislative branch in state government, or in stakeholder groups or partners that might be outside the university, or in communities across the state, as we've listened to people talk to us about the idea of such an institute. This is kind of a pinnacle moment for us, if you will, in thinking our way through the next steps. We've invited you here, whether you represent the university, whether you represent land-grant partners. We have 10 land-grant partners from across this part of the country who have joined us. Whether you represent organizations in the federal system or in the private world or in the foundation world, in the rural development world, whether you represent opportunities for us outside of any of those domains and other stakeholders that might be important, whether you represent people in our own state of Nebraska. We wanted to get this group in a room together to have a dialogue about this over a period of a couple of days to really think to that next step. So what we're challenging you to do tomorrow is to listen to the 4 key planks that you'll see in that forward, where we talk about transdisciplinary, working at the edges of disciplines to be able to do this, or whether it's in innovation and entrepreneurship, or whether it's in the full picture, not just economic development, but community vitality that you'll see described there, or whether it's in stakeholders and partners that we think are going to be so important to making this happen. So that's what we'll do tomorrow. We'll have a dialogue around those 4 areas. Then on Thursday morning, we're asking you in groups to work and think about some questions that we want to pose to you and glean your thoughts about these ideas.